Traveling through history, the show that uncovers the past mysteries. Washington, Jefferson, Alexander the Great, William the Conqueror, or the independence of the states.
All right, well, welcome to another episode of Traveling Through History. Today, we're going to be covering a really interesting movie that's always been one of my top 5 movies of all time, and that's the movie called Kingdom of Heaven. And Kingdom of Heaven is portraying a period of time in medieval Jerusalem, essentially the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the 3 religions that were always battling over Jerusalem. Of course, Jerusalem is very important to all 3 Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And so this is a really interesting period that the movie takes on because it's a period in between the Second Crusades and the Third Crusades, where there's a Christian king on the throne in Jerusalem. And that Christian king is Baldwin IV. And he takes over the throne at a very early age, 13 years old, before they find out that he's actually a leper and has leprosy. But he battles on and continues to lead his forces and lead the kingdom to some prominence. And he fends off the Islamic force led by Saladin, who is constantly trying to take over Jerusalem over a large period of time. And he actually is very successful in successfully fending off Saladin for a large number of years. Eventually, Baldwin, as you'll find out in our later discussion in the program, does die in 1185. And in the 2 years after his death, the men who were following him and the key leaders like Balian and others pull together and get the troops ready because they know another onslaught is coming from Saladin. So the movie really tackles those couple of years leading up to 1187 and then eventually the major battle at Hattin, which happens just outside of the city of Jerusalem, where finally Saladin gets over the top and is able to defeat the Christian forces and sack Jerusalem. And so we're going to go over all of the history in the movie, what the movie got right, what the movie got wrong, what the real history was. We're going to go into these 3 major characters I just mentioned, and we're going to talk about several of the key battles leading up to this particular major battle in 1187, and we're going to get into the Battle of Hattin. And we're going to talk about some of the really cool things about the movie that I liked, show you some visual images of it, and then we're going to get into some clips of the movie as well, so you can really get a feel for how great this film was. And again, with every Hollywood picture about a historical event, you have to take it with a grain of salt and just enjoy the movie for what it was, which was trying to show you what medieval Jerusalem was like and how it was being battled over by so many different religions and sects. So let's go ahead and get into the history of medieval Jerusalem in the period of 1180 to 1187. And we'll also talk about this great movie, Kingdom of Heaven. If you have not seen it, I recommend you check it out. All right, so this is the history of medieval Jerusalem in 1187 AD, the movie Kingdom of Heaven. See a great picture there on the top left of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is one of the most sacred sites in Christianity. That's the place where they believe Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem, and that was the end of his life, of course, and his ascension to heaven. And also at the Church of Holy Sepulchre, they believe was the tomb that was found empty when he ascended to heaven, and eventually came back as a man to his disciples, showing that he was the living God. And just below that picture, you can see there the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is on top of the Temple Mount, which is also one of the most holy sites and one of the holiest sites in Islam. And that Al-Aqsa Mosque is the location that Muslims believe that Muhammad ascended to heaven in his midnight ride. So you can see all these different locations in Jerusalem are incredibly important to those 2 religions. And then, of course, the Western Wall in Judaism is a place where Jews go every single day to pray and to wish that Jerusalem will be returned back to Judaism only without Christians and Muslims. So you have this huge major rub between the 3 major Abrahamic religions, as you can see, and that's why there's always been so much bloodshed and so much conflict over this incredibly important city. You see a picture there of the cover from the movie Kingdom of Heaven that I mentioned with star Orlando Bloom, who plays one of the major characters we'll get into in the film. You see also on the bottom there King Baldwin, who was the leper, he wore a mask most of his adult life and even wore that mask into battle many times to defend Jerusalem, his kingdom, and to defend Christianity. Some of his men fighting just above that with different crosses on their shields and on their chests. And then the man to the very far bottom right, that is Saladin. He was the very famous Sultan of Egypt and Syria. And Saladin just never gave up. He always wanted Jerusalem back. It was his prized possession. He knew that during the Second Crusades, the Christians had forced Jerusalem into their own arms and had forced all Arabs out of the area. And he wanted this city back for Islam. He wasn't going to give up until he got it. And of course, he was unsuccessful against Baldwin multiple times, but finally was successful in 1187. And we'll get into all that history. So Jerusalem being the most contested city on earth, why is that? It's an immense religious significance for Jews, Christians, and Muslims all. Each faith considers it a holy city with sacred sites and historical events that are central to their beliefs. Jerusalem is the holiest city in Judaism. It's the site of the Temple Mount, where ancient temples stood, including the first and second temples. The Western Wall, the remnant of the Second Temple, is a place of prayer and pilgrimage for Jews. Jews traditionally pray facing Jerusalem and have prayed to return Jerusalem for centuries. And now Jerusalem is Israel's capital city. And you can see a picture there of the Western Wall there in the center on the right. And that's where Jews go every single day to do their prayers facing Jerusalem. Also, Jerusalem is a focal point for the Christian faith due to its connection to Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and we showed you that picture there on the top, is believed to be built on the site of Jesus' crucifixion and burial, is a major pilgrimage site for Christians from all over the world. Other significant sites include the Garden of Gethsemane and Via Dolorosa, where they believe Jesus actually walked. And that's the path that Jesus actually believed he carried the cross to his own crucifixion. So also Jerusalem is the third holiest city in Islam. The Temple Mount, known as Haram al-Sharif in Arabic, is the location of the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And you see there on the bottom picture that mosque and the incredible dome that's over it. Muslims believe Muhammad's night journey and ascension to heaven originated from this site. Jerusalem is seen as a place where Abraham, David, and Solomon, prophets revered in Islam, all lived and worked. So you can see the incredible problem we've had throughout the thousands of years of history, that all three of these religions covet and want Jerusalem to be a central part of their religion. And so we've had to find this very tentative and tenuous situation where we're trying to create peace, where all three religions consider this one of their most holy cities. So it's really the political and spiritual reason that we have so many problems in Jerusalem. In terms of the history in the movie Kingdom of Heaven, breaking it down as to what was real and what was kind of glamorized for Hollywood. So we're talking about the 1187 CE time period, like we talked about. Saladin, the Ayyubid dynasty founder, defeats the Crusaders and returns the city, now known as Al-Auds, to Muslim control. That's what happens at the end of the movie. Kingdom of Heaven is a movie set during the Crusades, specifically between the Second and Third Crusades, focusing on the defense of the Kingdom of Jerusalem against Saladin's forces. While it features historical figures and events, it significantly fictionalizes many aspects for dramatic effect and storytelling. The movie accurately places the events in the late 12th century, during a period of intense conflict between Crusader states and the Muslim world led by Saladin. The film features characters like King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, the Leper King, known for his political acumen, also Saladin, the Ayyubid Sultan, who united Muslim forces and aimed to reclaim Jerusalem. The movie centers around a fictionalized version of Balian of Ibelin, who is played by Orlando Bloom, as you see there on the right. He was a nobleman who becomes a key figure in defending Jerusalem at the end of the movie. Where the real Balian was indeed a prominent figure, the movie alters his backstory, portraying him as a French blacksmith who travels to the Holy Land and learns to fight there. And of course, that was not totally true. The Balian family of Ibelin was actually from Italy. So that was a little bit of a license in terms of the actual history. But he was a nobleman and he became a very important knight, as you'll see in some of the clips later. The film depicts the Battle of Hattin and subsequent fall of Jerusalem to Saladin at the end of the movie, which were pivotal events in the Crusades. However, the movie simplifies and alters these events, especially Balian's role and the negotiations with Saladin. The movie portrays a false sense of peace between Baldwin IV and Saladin, suggesting they were motivated by a desire for tolerance, which is historically inaccurate. In reality, both leaders were committed to their respective faiths and aimed to expand their control, and were willing to do it by force, of course. The film contains numerous other historical inaccuracies, including misrepresentations of Crusader society, religious practices, and the political landscape of the time. For example, it inaccurately depicts the economic and cultural standing of Europe at the time, portrays a false sense of religious tolerance, and alters the motivations and actions of various historical figures. All of those were not true, but they were kind of glossed over in this movie. Kingdom of Heaven is a historical drama which focuses on entertainment and storytelling rather than strict historical accuracy. While it incorporates some real figures and events, it significantly fictionalized many aspects, making it a questionable source for understanding the Crusades in detail. The film is worth the watch because of the incredible action scenes, acting, and war sequences. And it just whets your appetite to learn the true story of the battle for Jerusalem over the centuries. So that's what I would say in terms of my own personal opinion. It is one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time. It whets your appetite. It gets you excited about history. It makes you want to read about this medieval period of Jerusalem. It makes you want to know what the real facts were of all these characters we're going to go through. Definitely worth a watch. I've watched it several times, and it does always spur me into wanting to read more about the actual history that really did happen. So that's what I would say about it. Definitely worth a watch, but don't consider everything that happens in the movie as historically accurate. So let's talk about one of the major characters in the movie, and that's Baldwin IV of Jerusalem. He was a leper, as we mentioned. He lived from 1161 to 1185. He was known as the Leper King or King of Jerusalem from 1174, 13 years old, until his death, 1185. Baldwin ascended to the throne when he was 13 years old, despite having his leprosy. He launched several attempts to curb Egyptian ruler Saladin's increasing power and desire to take Jerusalem for the Muslim world. Much of his life was marked by infighting amongst the king's nobles, and Baldwin himself was the only person capable of holding them all together in the city. Throughout his reign, and especially at the end of his life, he was troubled by his succession, working to select a suitable heir and prevent a succession crisis after his death. Choosing competent advisors, Baldwin ruled a thriving Crusader state and has succeeded in protecting it from Saladin. At 9 years old, he was sent to be educated by Archbishop William of Tyre. William noticed preliminary symptoms of leprosy, but Baldwin was only diagnosed after he succeeded his father as king after 13 years old. Therefore, his hands and face became increasingly disfigured. He mastered horse riding despite gradually losing any sensation in his extremities, and he fought battles until his last years. As soon as he assumed government, Baldwin planned an invasion of Egypt, which fell through because his vassals' uncooperativeness. Leprosy prevented Baldwin from marrying, but he hoped to abdicate when his older sister Sibylla married William of Montferrat in 1176. But William died the next year. So you can see he was always kind of working on his succession. He knew that with his leprosy, he was going to have a short life. And because he was not married and did not have an heir, he was always trying to find a way to figure out who he was going to give the kingdom succession to. So Saladin attacked Baldwin's kingdom in 1177, the kingdom of Jerusalem. But the king and nobleman Reynard of Chatillon repelled him at Montgisard, earning Baldwin fame. In 1180, to forestall a coup by Count Raymond III of Tripoli and Prince Bohemond III of Antioch, Baldwin had Sibylla marry Guy of Lusignan from France. Guy was opposed by a large faction of the nobility and soon permanently impaired his relationship with Baldwin through his insubordination. Although Baldwin wished to abdicate, the internal discord that followed forced him to remain on the throne until he died, as he was the only one capable of uniting the quarreling nobility within Jerusalem. Baldwin again repelled Saladin in 1182 at the Battle of Le Forbelet, but leprosy rendered him near incapable in 1183, a year later. After Guy's failure to lead, Baldwin disinherited him and had Sevilla's son, Baldwin V, crowned co-king before traveling in a litter to lift Saladin's siege of Kerak. Because their refusal to attend court, Baldwin failed to have Sevilla's marriage to Guy annulled and Guy's fief of Assignon confiscated. In early 1185, he arranged for Raymond to rule as regent for Sevilla's son until he was old enough. And then he died of fever before May 16th of 1185. So you can see he died at 24 years old. So he really had a short life, but a very consequential reign. 2 years after his death, his realm was destroyed by Saladin at the Battle of Hattin, which is really the culmination of the movie, or the climax of the movie. And you can see a great picture there of what the character looked like in the movie on the bottom right. And then just above that, the actor who played Baldwin IV in the movie, and that is Edward Norton, a very excellent actor. And he really did a great job in the role, as you'll see when you see the movie. So the next person to talk about is Orlando Bloom's character, Balian of Ibelin, Lord of Jerusalem. As we said a little bit earlier, he was portrayed as a Frenchman in the movie, but he really was from Italy in real life. Balian of Ibelin was a prominent figure in the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem, known for his military prowess and diplomatic skills during the late 12th century. He played a crucial role in the defense of Jerusalem against Saladin's forces and negotiated the city's surrender in 1187. Balian was born around 1143, the third son of Barisan of Ibelin. He initially held no significant titles or lands, but his marriage to Maria Comnena, the widow of King Almaric, elevated his status. The marriage also made him stepfather to Isabella, who later became Queen of Jerusalem. Balian inherited the lordship of Ibelin from his brother Baldwin, who held several lordships. Although he was one of King Baldwin's hands for 15 years, Balian's most famous act was his defense of Jerusalem against Saladin's siege in 1187. And of course, the most important reason that that was his biggest act was he had to do that because Baldwin had passed away 2 years earlier, and Jerusalem needed leadership, and so he stepped into that role. He organized the city's defenses and negotiated the surrender with Saladin, securing the release of many Christians and saving many lives. His actions were praised by both Christians and Muslims, with some Arab chronicles even describing him as king-like. Balian later participated in the Third Crusade, though his role is not as extensively documented as his defense of Jerusalem. He continued to be a respected figure in the Holy Land, and his descendants played a significant role in the region's history for the next century. His actions during the fall of Jerusalem significantly impacted the course of the Crusades and the history of the Holy Land. So you can see, even though he fought very bravely with his men to defend Jerusalem, once they were defeated by Saladin, he surrendered the city, and he came up with a deal with Saladin to essentially allow safe passage for everybody who was in the city and all the Christians who wanted to go home. And that was a huge deal because many of those Christians, especially the knights and the fighters, later came back in the Third Crusades to try to take Jerusalem again. So the next character to talk about in the movie Kingdom of Heaven is Saladin, who we've mentioned a couple of times. He was the Sultan of Egypt and Syria. And you can see in the movie he was played by Ghassan Massoud, who was an excellent actor in this movie, I must say. Saladin was born in either 1137 or 38. There's some difference in history as to the year he was born. He was a prominent Kurdish Muslim leader who became Sultan of Egypt and Syria in the 12th century. He's the most famous for his military victories against Christian crusaders. He established the Ayyubid dynasty and became a symbol of Islamic power and chivalry. Saladin's full name was Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, and he was born in Tikrit, Mesopotamia, which is present-day Iraq. He was raised in a Kurdish family with strong ties to the Seljuk Turks. Saladin's early career was marked by his service to his uncle Shirkuh and later Nur-ad-Din and the Zengid ruler of Syria. He gained recognition for his military skills and became governor of Egypt in 1169. Saladin eventually seized power in Egypt, establishing his own dynasty after the death of Nur-ad-Din. Saladin's most significant achievement was the recapture of Jerusalem from the Crusaders in 1187, after multiple failures to capture the city. This victory followed his decisive triumph at the Battle of Hattin, where he annihilated a large Crusader army. Saladin's military campaigns unified Muslim territories from Egypt to Syria and beyond. Saladin's chivalrous and merciful treatment of his enemies, particularly after battles, earned him respect even from his Christian opponents. So you can see he and the individuals he was fighting against, whether it was Baldwin IV or other leaders, always had a tremendous respect for each other. And so when there was defeat or victory on either side, they treated each other with respect and often allowed safe passage after surrender. So that was a very respectful thing that these leaders would do back then. So the Battle of Montgisard, this was a battle that happened in 1177. It was a significant clash between the Crusaders that took place on November 25th, 1177, near Ramla in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. A small Christian force led by 16-year-old King Baldwin IV. So he had been on the throne for 3 years at this point, and he was the king of Jerusalem, as you heard, who suffered from leprosy, defeated a much larger army of the Ayyubid Sultanate under Saladin. The battle resulted in a major Christian victory, with Saladin's forces suffering heavy losses and significant blow to his prestige. Saladin, aiming to expand his power and undermine the kingdom of Jerusalem, invaded the region. Baldwin IV, despite his illness, rallied his forces to defend the kingdom. The Christian army, though outnumbered, consisted of experienced knights and soldiers, including the Knights Templar. Saladin's army, while larger, was caught off guard and disorganized during the advance. Baldwin, leading from a litter due to his leprosy, charged Saladin's forces with the Knights Templar at the forefront. The Christian charge was successful, breaking through the Muslim lines. The battle resulted in a decisive victory for the Christians, and Saladin's army routed and forced to retreat. The Christians captured Saladin's baggage train and inflicted heavy losses at the end of the battle. The Battle of Montgisard was a major upset for Saladin, highlighting Baldwin's courage and strategic skill in the battlefield. It boosted Christian morale and temporarily halted Saladin's expansionist ambitions in the region. So you can see this happened in 1177, a full 10 years before the Battle of Hattin. And this was one of the major battles that Baldwin won against Saladin. Of course, they met several times. You see a great picture there on the right of what the battle would have looked like on this large hill just outside of Jerusalem. And then a battle of Montgisard and what it looked like with all the forces against each other. The next battle that took place happened about 5 years later. This was the Battle of Forbelet in Syria, also known as the Battle of Belvoir Castle. And it was a Crusader victory against Saladin's forces in 1182 during Saladin's campaign in the Levant. It occurred near Belvoir Castle, where the Crusader army, led by King Baldwin IV, confronted Saladin's Ayyubid forces. While not a full-scale decisive battle, the Crusaders successfully defended their position around the castle and prevented Saladin from achieving a major victory. Saladin, seeking to expand his territory, launched a campaign against the Crusaders in May through August of 1182. The Crusader army, led by King Baldwin IV, was primarily composed of forces from the Kingdom of Jerusalem, while Saladin's forces were primarily Ayyubid troops from Egypt. The Crusaders, aware of Saladin's tactics, adopted a defensive formation, with infantry forming a line and archers positioned to repel attacks. Saladin's forces, known for their horse archers and feigned retreats, attempted to disrupt Crusader formations. The battle did not escalate into a full-scale engagement, as the Crusaders maintained their defensive stance and avoided being drawn into a pitched battle. Saladin eventually withdrew his forces back to Damascus for a Crusader victory. So that's the Battle of Le Forbelet, and you see old remnants of that old castle there on the top right, and what it looks like today that they were defending in this battle. And then just down below that, a painting of what the battle would have looked like with cavalry against infantry. So the next battle is the culminating battle that happens towards the end of the movie Kingdom of Heaven, and that's the Battle of Hattin, which was the Muslim recapture of Jerusalem. The Battle of Hattin, fought on July 4th, 1187, was the decisive Crusader defeat by Saladin's forces, marking a turning point in the battle for Jerusalem. Saladin's victory led to the recapture of Jerusalem and most of the Crusader-held territories, prompting a European response in the form of the Third Crusade, and reversing Christian gains coming from the Second Crusade and following years. So you can see this was such an important battle and such an incredible victory for the Muslim forces under Saladin that it ended up prompting Europe to respond by putting together new forces and coming back some years later in the form of the Third Crusades. Internal disputes and political instability had weakened the Kingdom of Jerusalem after Baldwin V's death. Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, aimed to eliminate the Crusader states and restore Muslim rule in the world's holiest city, Jerusalem. A vassal of the Crusader king Guy de Lusignan, who we talked about earlier, attacked a Muslim caravan just outside the city, providing Saladin with a pretext to break the truce that had been in place for 4 years. And they actually show that in the movie quite well, how Guy did something really stupid, which was to break this truce that had been in place for a number of years after the battle in 1182. Saladin laid siege to Tiberias, prompting the Crusaders to mobilize their forces. The Crusader army, led by King Guy, marched from Sephoria towards Tiberias, facing extreme heat and harassment from Saladin's forces. The Crusaders were lured into a waterless area where they were surrounded and harassed by Saladin's horse archers. Exhausted and thirsty, the Crusaders were unable to break through Saladin's lines, leading to a chaotic and desperate battle. Saladin's forces decisively defeated the Crusader army, capturing or killing the vast majority of their soldiers. Following the Battle of Hattin, Saladin captured Jerusalem and other major Crusader cities and castles. And so there's some great scenes in the movie that show this Battle of Hattin, and then also the next battle, which was the Siege of Jerusalem itself, using lots of different incredible equipment like catapults and ramming devices and things that they got into the city through sheer force. And so it was pretty incredible if you watch some of those battle scenes. These are some of the paintings of that Battle of Hattin that happened just outside of the city. You can see some of the really cool ways it was portrayed by painters at the time. And it gives you a real sense for what that war would have been like with all the different types of weapons they were using. And then here's some real pictures from the movie itself for the Battle of Hattin. You can see on the top left there the Christians marching. You can see a picture there of Saladin with his helmet on. On the bottom left there were all the Christian forces on one side and the Muslims on the other, and then all the cavalry in the middle riding around. There in the center, of course, is Orlando Bloom's character, as we mentioned. And then on the far right is another scene on one of the hills outside of Jerusalem, what this chaotic mess would have been like. Here's some fantastic books you should check out. The first one there is Under Jerusalem with our friend of the show, Andrew Lawler. If you haven't seen his episode when he was on the show talking about his book, Under Jerusalem, it's definitely worth a watch. I'll put it in the description down below. He talks a lot about all the different excavations they've been doing the last 150 years and what they've been finding from all the different centuries of Jerusalem history. See, just to the right of that, a great book called Kingdom of Heaven, which the book was loosely based after. And then another book to the right of that, from First Crusade to Third Crusade. This was Jerusalem, the Kingdom of Heaven by Richard Foreman. To the right of that, Saladin, a great book about Saladin. To the right of that is a book that I just picked up and have not read yet, but I'm looking forward to it. It's called Kingdom of Scars, and that's talking about Baldwin, Saladin, and the price of piety. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that comes out. To the bottom left, you got the character played by Orlando Bloom in the movie Balian, and that's a real interesting book. To the right of that is a book about Baldwin IV, the Crusader King. Really excellent book there. To the right of that, another Saladin book. He's called the Hero of Islam in this book. And then finally, the Battles of the Crusades book, which covers the Second and Third Crusades really, really well and really extensively. So that gives you guys a lot of great reading material to get into to learn more about this period. So that should give you a really good sense for medieval Jerusalem, what was happening in 1180 to 1187, and even before, what was happening between the Second and the Third Crusades, and what really precipitated the Third Crusade was the capture of Jerusalem by the Muslim forces. So Europe had to reorganize and put troops together and come back and try to capture it again. You can see this most contested city throughout history and some of the reasons why. These three religions have all considered it one of their holiest sites, and then it's worth fighting for, worth dying for. And so you've always had this real conflict between the three religions. Even today, you have that same political situation we're in. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of great clips from the movie Kingdom of Heaven, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Well, just wanted to take a moment to do a shout out to our sponsor for tonight's Traveling Through History episode, and that is Barnes & Noble. And just one of my favorite places to go, have one very close to my house, go to it quite often. I like to go through there and just browse through all the great books and magazines. They have CDs, DVDs, everything you can imagine. They even have a little cafe in there. You can sit and drink your coffee or your hot chocolate. It's just a great time. And so definitely check out your local Barnes & Noble store, or go to barnesandnoble.com and go check out a book and purchase something, or just have a great afternoon sitting in there and looking at all the great offerings that they have. So again, thank you so much, Barnes & Noble, for sponsoring us tonight. We'll see you next time.
Not have looked like much, but the fact that they decide to wait for the other to speak first can also be seen as a sign of courtesy.
I pray you pull back your cavalry and leave this matter to me.
Wait, what did Saladin just say?
I pray you pull back your cavalry and leave this matter to me.
Saladin is praying, hoping, politely asking Baldwin to withdraw his army back to Jerusalem. This is not a threat, this is a request. And how does the king of Jerusalem respond?
I pray you retire unharmed to Damascus.
The first two words are repeated, I pray. Baldwin is not only matching Saladin's energy, but he also wishes him a safe return to Damascus.
Reynald of Chatillon will be punished. I swear it. Withdraw, we will all die here.
Here Baldwin tells Saladin to withdraw, but the words he chooses to use show that he is not making threats. What stands out is not necessarily what Baldwin chooses to say, but instead what he chooses to not say. Baldwin doesn't tell Saladin that if he does not withdraw,
I will send you my physicians.
Salaam alaikum.
Baldwin decides to thank him by speaking Arabic, the language of Saladin, the language of the Muslim people, and the language of his enemy. And how does Saladin respond?
Wa alaikum salam.
Saladin answers Baldwin's salam, despite the fact that he is not a Muslim, despite the fact that he is a Christian, despite the fact that we just see Baldwin's sister, Princess Sibylla, just in awe of what she just witnessed. She just watched her brother cause Saladin and his entire army to withdraw, using nothing but words.
Master Gravedigger, it is you, not what I was.
So that gives you a really good sense for the battles that were happening in the Kingdom of Heaven movie, but also leading up to the actual events themselves. As you saw, you could hear Baldwin speaking to his men, getting the troops together. They had understood Saladin had crossed the river with 200,000 troops, And so it was an imminent threat to Kerak and to Jerusalem itself. So you heard what he sounded like in speaking to his right hand. You heard, of course, Saladin in his different confrontations, both when he rode out to speak to Baldwin himself, and then when he actually was speaking to the Balian of Ibelin, who there at the end, you can see, surrendered the city and did so in a way that he could save all of his people within the walls, men, women, children, queen, and king. And he did so because he didn't think he had a choice. They were completely surrounded at that point, and we're going to lose the city anyway. And essentially everyone was going to die at that site. So it gives you a really good sense for the movie. You can see the action scenes, the catapults, the ramming devices, the incredible, brutal warfare that was conducted back then for this most contested city in world history. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Definitely check out the movie, check out all the different books we recommended to you, and check out this period of medieval history in Jerusalem. It really is fascinating. Maybe the most fascinating of all, the period between Second and Third Crusades and the fall of Jerusalem over a century, about 5 different times to different religions. So hopefully you enjoyed that. You want to dig a little bit more into the subject itself. Thank you so much for all your subscribing to the channel, your liking of our videos, your incredible comments that you give us every week, and the different topics you'd like us to cover. Hopefully you enjoyed this discussion about this period and about one of my favorite movies of all time, Kingdom of Heaven, and the accuracies and inaccuracies of the movie, but still the ability to appreciate it anyway. We hope you love history as much as we do, and we'll see you next time on an episode of Traveling Through History. Have a great night.
Traveling through history, the show that uncovers the past mysteries. Washington, Jefferson, Alexander the Great, William the Conqueror, or the independence of the states.